You swim like you're drowning in slow motion. Get out of my pool." She got out. She toweled off without looking at him. She walked to the end of the lane, sat down on the cold concrete, and put her goggles back on. Not because she was going to swim again, because she didn't want anyone to see her eyes. That was the last thing Coach Bernard Selkirk said to Mireille Okafor in front of 11 other swimmers at the Gatineau Aquatic Center on a Tuesday morning in March. She was 23 years old. She had driven 40 minutes in the dark to be there by 5 a.m. She had not eaten because she never ate before practice. Her hair was still wet from the warm-up set. The stopwatch in Selkirk's hand read 154.3 for the 200 freestyle. The Canadian national record for women her age was 154.8. He didn't look at the stopwatch twice. He pressed reset and called the next swimmer in. Selkirk had been running the program at Gatineau for 19 years. He had 2 national medalists on his record, both of them men. Both of them white, both of them from families whose names were on plaques in the lobby. He had a waiting list for his developmental group. He had a handshake deal with 3 university athletic departments that his swimmers got looked at first. He was, by every institutional measure available to a mid-sized aquatic center in Western Quebec, a success. What he was not was careful about who was watching. There was a woman in the viewing gallery that morning. She had a travel mug of coffee and a clipboard, and the particular stillness of someone who had learned to observe without being noticed. Her name was Dr. Annette Plouffe, and she was the National Development Coordinator for Natation Canada. She had driven from Ottawa the night before because she had heard from 3 separate coaches in 2 provinces that there was a swimmer at Gatineau worth seeing. She had not told anyone she was coming. She had not told Selkirk. She had been sitting in the gallery for 40 minutes when he told Mireille to get out of the pool. She did not write anything on her clipboard. She watched Mireille sit down on the concrete with her goggles on, and she watched the stopwatch in Selkirk's hand go back to 0, and she finished her coffee. Then she took out her phone and called a colleague in Toronto. "I'm in Gatineau," she said. "I just watched a 23-year-old woman go 154.3 in a club session. Hand-timed, but I was close to the wall. She was decelerating into the turn. The line was quiet. Annette. She's unregistered with the national program. I checked before I came. There's no file." "How is there no file?" "That's what I'm going to find out." She hung up. She looked down at the pool. Mireille had taken the goggles off. She was staring at the water. She was not crying. She was doing something harder than crying. She was deciding something. Annette Plouffe went down to find her. Mireille Okafor lived in a 1-bedroom apartment above a dépanneur on St. Raymond Boulevard in Gatineau with a kitchen window that faced a brick wall and a radiator that knocked all winter. She had furnished it from Facebook Marketplace over 2 years. A mattress, a table with mismatched chairs, a lamp with no shade. The walls had nothing on them except a printed photograph, taped above the sink, slightly crooked, of a woman in a yellow dress standing in front of a lake. Her mother, Josephine, taken the summer before Josephine's diagnosis. That was 14 months ago. Mireille had grown up swimming. Not in a club, not with a coach who wore branded jackets and kept a filing cabinet of split times. She had grown up swimming in Lac Papineau in the summers, and in the municipal pool in Thurso in the winters. Racing her cousins, racing strangers, racing the clock on the wall that nobody else bothered to watch. Her mother used to sit on the dock with a stopwatch that she'd bought at a pharmacy for $11. She had kept a notebook. Every time, every distance, every weather condition. The notebook was in a box under Mireille's bed. She had joined Selkirk's program 8 months ago because a physiotherapist had mentioned his name after watching her swim laps to rehabilitate a shoulder injury. The physiotherapist had said, in the mild Canadian way of someone who doesn't want to oversell a thing, "You might want to have someone look at your technique." Selkirk had taken her on after a trial session, said nothing, complimentary, assigned her a lane, and charged her the full program fee, which Mireille paid in 2 installments. He had not once submitted her times to the provincial registry. She hadn't known that was something he was supposed to do. Annette Plouffe found her in the parking lot, knocking a bicycle that had a milk crate zip-tied to the rear rack. Mireille Okafor? Mireille looked up. She was still in her kit. Her hair was dark and wet against her shoulders. "I'm not interested in talking about this morning," she said. "I know," Annette said. "I don't want to talk about this morning either. I want to talk about the 154-3. Mireille's hands went still on the lock. "Who are you?" Annette told her. She said it plainly, without inflation, the way people with real credentials don't need to perform them. She handed over a business card. Mireille looked at it for a long time. "You were up there?" "Yes." "For how long?" "I saw the full set." Mireille looked at the card again. Then she looked up. She had the kind of face that had learned not to react quickly to good news, because good news had a habit of rearranging itself into something else. "I have a job at noon," she said. "I work shifts at the CSC on Lorraine. I can give you 20 minutes. 20 minutes is enough," Annette said. "Can I buy you a coffee?" There was a Tim Hortons 2 blocks away. They sat at a corner table with the morning light coming sideways through the window. Mireille wrapped both hands around her cup. She had a bruise on her left forearm from a lane rope she'd misjudged in the dark the week before. Annette told her what she'd seen. She told her what the time meant. She used words like national pipeline and development pathway, and Mireille listened without expression. Then Annette said, "I have to ask you something directly. Go ahead. Why are you not registered with the program? At your level, at your age, someone should have put your name in." Mireille looked out the window. A man was salting the sidewalk outside the pharmacy across the street, working slowly, methodically, the way people work when they know the cold is coming back regardless. "Because Coach Selkirk told me I wasn't ready," she said. 6 months ago when I asked. "He said the program looks for a certain profile, and that I should focus on club work for another year." Annette did not move. "He told you that. He said the program wasn't built for late starters. I started competing at 21. He said the development window was different, Mireille." Annette put her coffee down. "The development window for women's distance freestyle is 22 to 28. You are exactly in it. There is no policy of any kind that would have excluded you." The radiator in the corner of the Tim Hortons ticked. Someone near the counter was telling a story about their brother-in-law. Mireille sat with Annette's words in the air between them and did not answer for a moment. "My mother is sick," she said finally, not as a non sequitur, as an explanation for something she hadn't said out loud yet. "She's been in treatment since last January. I drive to Maniwaki every weekend. I work shifts during the week. I have been swimming at 5 a.m. because it's the only time that doesn't take something from someone else." She paused. "I don't have money for a program, and I don't have time for someone to tell me again that I'm not the right profile." Annette looked at her steadily. "I am not going to tell you that. What are you going to tell me?" "I'm going to tell you that the national program has a hardship subsidy that Selkirk never mentioned to you. I'm going to tell you that we have a training block in Montreal in 6 weeks with 3 coaches who have taken women to the podium at Commonwealth and Worlds. And I'm going to tell you that what I watched this morning was not a late starter. It was someone who has been ready for 2 years and nobody filed the paperwork." Mireille looked at her for a long time. She had her mother's stillness. Josephine Okafor had been a nurse for 31 years in a rural hospital where stillness was a professional survival skill. "If I go to Montreal and I don't swim 154, Mireille said, "if I can't replicate it, if it was an anomaly, what happens then?" Annette thought about her answer before she gave it. That small pause, the deliberateness of it, was the thing that landed. "Then I would have been wrong," she said. "And I've been doing this long enough to know what wrong looks like." This morning did not look like wrong. Mireille looked down at the coffee cup. Then she put it on the table, took the business card from where she'd set it beside her cup, folded it twice, and put it in the front pocket of her kit bag. "I'll think about it," she said. "Don't call me. I'll call you." She stood up, put her jacket on, and walked out. She did not say thank you, and she did not say goodbye. She pushed through the door into the cold Gatineau morning, and Annette watched her go and did not follow. That evening, Mireille drove the 2-lane highway north to Maniwaki in a 2009 Civic with a crack in the dashboard and heat that worked on the driver's side only. The drive was 90 minutes in good weather. She had done it 47 times since her mother's diagnosis. She knew every Tim Hortons, every OPP sign, every stretch of highway where the bush crowded in so close. The headlights only showed you the next 20 meters. Josephine Okafor was sitting up in the chair by the window when Mireille arrived. She had a blanket over her lap and a crossword on the table. She was 58 years old, and she had lost 20 pounds in 14 months. And her hair, the thick natural hair that her whole life associated with her mother's health and vitality, was covered now by a headscarf her sister had sent from Accra. She did not ask Mireille how practice was. She never asked any more. She watched her daughter sit down on the edge of the bed, still in her jacket, and she waited. Something happened this morning, Mireille said. She told her about Annette Plouffe. She told her about the time. She told her about the business card in 2 parts. She told her what Annette had said about Selkirk and the registration. Josephine said nothing while she listened. When Mireille was finished, she picked up her crossword pencil, turned it end over end once, and set it back down. "He knew," Josephine said. "Mom. He looked at that stopwatch and he knew what it said and he sent you to the bench. She was not asking, and then he told you the program wasn't for you." "Yes." Josephine was quiet for a moment. Outside, a truck moved through the Maniwaki night, its lights sweeping across the ceiling once and then gone. "Mireille, I want to ask you something." "Okay." "When you were 12, at Lac Papineau, do you remember the summer we timed you, on the full width and back?" Mireille looked at her. "Yes. Do you remember what you said when you saw the number?" She did remember. She had stood dripping at the edge of the dock and looked at the pharmacy stopwatch in her mother's hand and said, very quietly, as if saying it louder would break it, "I want to go faster." "I remember," she said. "That girl is still there," Josephine said. "She has been getting up at 4:30 in the morning for 3 years. She has been driving to Gatineau and back, and driving to Maniwaki, and back and working shifts at the CLSC. And she has not complained to me once." She looked at her daughter. "I need you to call that woman. Mom, I can't leave you two. I have your aunt. I have Dr. Beaumont. I have the whole Maniwaki hospital system, which is admittedly small, but it exists." She paused. "What you don't have is this chance again. These things don't come twice." Mireille looked at the crossword on the table. It was half done. 13 across was blank. "What if I'm not good enough?" she said. Not as a real fear, as a real question. Josephine reached across and put her hand over her daughter's. Her hand was thinner than it used to be, and cooler, and Mireille had trained herself not to register that, or at least not to let Josephine see her registering it. "I held a stopwatch over a lake for 6 summers, her mother said. "I don't need a national program to tell me what I saw." Mireille called Annette the next morning from the hospital parking lot, still in the car with the engine running for heat. The training block in Montreal was at the Claude Robillard Center. 6 weeks, 4.5 hours a day in the water. 2 strength sessions, 1 video analysis session per week. There were 8 women in the cohort. Mireille was the only one who drove herself, the only one without a club affiliation in her file, and the only one whose kit was washed in a coin laundry on the corner, because her building's machines had been out since November. The head coach's name was Pierre-André Beausoleil. He was 61, compact, the kind of quiet that was not silence but concentration. He had 3 Commonwealth medalists on his record. He did not speak much during the first week. He watched. He made notes in a red binder he carried everywhere. He did not tell anyone they were good or bad. He said, again differently, from the top. On the 4th day, Mireille had a 200 freestyle time trial. She went 1:53.1. Beausoleil looked at the printout from the electronic timing system. A real timing system. Not a pharmacy stopwatch, not a hand on a button, and he put it in the red binder without showing it to anyone. Then he walked to the end of the lane and crouched down. Your first 50, he said. You're swimming like someone who expects to get slower. You protect energy at the start that you've already earned the right to spend. He looked at her. Tomorrow we work on the first wall. What was the time? She said. He stood up. He didn't answer. He walked to the next lane. She found out from the timing sheet on the board at the end of the session. She stood in front of it in her wet suit for a full 30 seconds. Then she walked to the change room, sat down on the bench, and did not move for 5 minutes. 1:53.1. The Canadian women's record in the 200 freestyle was 1:54. It had been held by a swimmer from British Columbia for 11 years. Mireille had not known that. She had not known the record, had not been tracking it, had been measuring herself only against Selkirk's indifference and Lac Papineau and her mother's pharmacy stopwatch. She sat on the bench in the change room at Claude Robillard and understood, for the first time, the full size of what had been kept from her. She did not sleep well that night. She called Josephine at 9, said nothing about the time, asked how the crossword was going. Josephine said 13 across was still blank. They stayed on the phone for 20 minutes without saying much. When they hung up, Mireille lay on the narrow bed in the residence room she'd been assigned and looked at the ceiling and thought about Selkirk pressing reset. She was not angry in the hot way. She was angry in the long way, the kind that becomes fuel. 2 weeks later, a second-year coach in the cohort named Dominique Laval. She was 26, had swum at McGill, had the easy confidence of someone whose path had always been properly lit. Stopped Mireille in the hallway outside the weight room. Biozolale asked me something yesterday, she said. He asked me if you'd been formally submitted for the trials selection camp. Mireille looked at her.
No. He wants to put your name in.
The trials were 4 months away. The 200 freestyle at the Pan American Championships in the summer, 2 spots on the team. Dominique, Mireille said. My file didn't exist 6 weeks ago. I know. I have no competitive history, no club record, no ranking. I know that too. Dominique paused. He's submitting your time trial results and the training block video. That's what he told me. Mireille stood in the hallway. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead. From the pool deck, she could hear the particular slap of water that meant someone had gone in hard off the block. He didn't tell me himself, she said. No. I think he thought you might say no. She thought about it. I'll tell him myself. She found Biozolale on the deck 20 minutes later, watching a backstroke swimmer from Laval work through a turn sequence. She stood 2 meters back until he turned. Dominique told me, she said. He looked at her. And? I want to know one thing. Are you submitting my name because you believe it, or because you think it looks good for the program to have a file like mine? Biozolale was quiet for a moment. He looked back at the pool. You went 1:53.1 in week 4, he said. On insufficient sleep, in a borrowed training block, with a start sequence you'd been doing wrong for 3 years and which we've now fixed. I submitted your name because the number doesn't care about the file. She nodded once. Okay, she said. What do I do different at the trials? He almost smiled. Same thing you did at 1:53.1. Only this time spend the first 50 like you already know what the second 50 is going to cost you. The selection camp was held in Vancouver in April. 12 women. 2 spots. Mireille drove to the Ottawa airport at 4 in the morning, checked her 1 bag, sat at the gate eating a gas station granola bar she'd packed the night before, and called her mother. I'm at the airport, she said. I know, Josephine said. I've been up, Mom. It's 4 a.m. I was doing 13 across. I got it. What was it? Threshold, Josephine said. 8 letters, had the H and the O. Mireille looked at the runway through the gate window. A ground crew truck was moving slowly along the taxiway, its yellow lights turning in the dark. I'm scared, she said. Not as a confession. As a fact she was putting somewhere outside herself. I know, Josephine said. You've been scared every time you've gone faster. That's not a warning sign. That's just the size of the thing you're doing. They didn't say much else. When they hung up, Mireille put the phone in her jacket pocket and sat with her hands in her lap and watched the ground crew do their careful, methodical work in the dark. At the Vancouver Aquatic Center, the 200 freestyle final came down to 3 women. The favorite was a swimmer from Alberta named Carson Whitfield. 26 years old, 2 Pan Am appearances, the polished certainty of someone who had been pointed at this moment for years. The second was a Quebec club swimmer named Isabeau Tremblay, who had gone 154.4 at regionals. The third was Mireille Okafor, unattached, no ranking, whose file still said development cohort, first year. Annette Plouffe was in the viewing gallery. She had a travel mug and no clipboard this time. Beausoleil crouched at the end of the lane before the heat. Carson is going to go out fast, he said. She always goes out fast. Let her, I know. Your race is meters 40 to 160. That's where you make the decision. I know. He looked at her, you know. So go know it in the water. She walked to the block. She looked at the water for 1 second. The flat, official, unmistakably serious surface of a competition pool. Nothing like Lac Papineau. Nothing like the Gatineau Club. Everything different, and she thought about her mother at a kitchen table in Maniwaki, with a crossword and a pencil at 4 in the morning. She got on the block. Carson went out at 55.1 on the first 100. Mireille went out at 55.8. She was 3/4 of a body length behind coming off the wall, and she knew it, and she did not panic, because Beausoleil had told her not to, and she believed him. From the 40-meter mark, she stopped thinking about Carson. She had done this distance, in this time, in an empty training pool, in a club pool, in a lake, in the dark, at 5 a.m., in borrowed lane space on 4 hours of sleep, with mother's voice in her ear and her mother's hands on a pharmacy stopwatch. She had done it more times than anyone watching had seen. She had done it in ways that nobody had filed. She came off the second wall clean. At the 120 mark, she was on Carson's shoulder. At the 140, she was half a body length ahead. At the 160, the crowd that had been politely attentive stood up in the way crowds stand up when they are watching something they did not prepare themselves to watch. She touched the wall. The board took 2 seconds. Mireille Okafor, 152.6. Carson Whitfield touched at 153.4. Isabeau Tremblay at 153.9. The Canadian record had stood for 11 years. It did not stand past the second week of April. Mireille hung on the lane rope for a moment. She was breathing in the specific way of a swimmer who has left everything in the water. Not gasping, but open, the lungs just reminding the body they exist. Then she looked up at the board. Then she looked at it again. Annette was already moving toward the deck. Beausoleil was at the end of the lane with his arms crossed and his red binder under one arm, and his expression utterly unrevised. He waited until she had pulled herself out of the water. Then he said, "The first 50. She looked at him. "Better," he said. That was all. He made a note in the binder. Later, in the change room, a reporter from CBC Sports knocked and asked if she had 2 minutes. Mireille came out with her hair still wet, a towel around her shoulders, a granola bar in her hand because she hadn't eaten since 4 a.m. And it was now nearly 2 in the afternoon. "You broke a record that's been on the books since 2013, the reporter said. "How long have you been in the national program?" 6 weeks. The reporter looked at her. 6 weeks. "I trained privately for 3 years before that. In Gatineau. With a club program. Why weren't you in the national system?" Mireille looked at the recorder in the reporter's hand. She thought about Selkirk pressing reset. She thought about what she'd said to him when she was 12 at Lac Papineau. She thought about Josephine's hands on the pharmacy stopwatch, every summer, in all weather, writing the numbers in a notebook under Mireille's bed. "You'd have to ask my old coach that," she said. "I don't have a good answer for you." The story ran on the CBC website that evening. A record broken. A swimmer with 6 weeks of national program experience. An unattached classification in her file 6 weeks ago. A club in Gatineau with 19 years of records and one swimmer who had never been submitted to the provincial registry. By the following morning, the Quebec Swimming Association had opened an administrative review of the Gatineau program. By the afternoon, Natation Canada had issued a statement about registration obligations for affiliated coaches. By Thursday, 3 other swimmers from Selkirk's club had come forward to say their times had never been submitted either. Selkirk did not comment publicly. His program was suspended pending review. The waiting list had 43 names on it. Mireille did not follow the news cycle. She drove north to Maniwaki the day after the final. She pulled into the hospital car park in the early evening, walked through the double doors, and found her mother in the chair by the window, with the crossword and the blanket and the headscarf from Accra. Josephine looked at her once. She looked at her the way a mother looks at a daughter when she does not need to be told. She opened her arms. Mireille crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed and leaned into her mother's shoulder, and Josephine held her, and neither of them said anything for a long time. Outside the window, the Maniwaki night was quiet, the bush dark against the sky, and somewhere north of town the lake was still under its ice, waiting, the way things wait that have been there longer than any of us and will be there long after. 13 across, Mireille said finally, against her mother's shoulder. Threshold, Josephine said. She pressed her lips to the top of her daughter's head. You found it. The Pan American Championships were held in Guadalajara in July. Mireille Okafor swam the 200 freestyle in 1:52.1, standing on the podium in gold, the Canadian flag moving in a draft from an unseen vent above the arena. She did not cry during the anthem. She stood with her hands at her sides and her chin level, and her eyes on the flag. The way someone stands when they have been waiting for a thing so long that the arrival of it requires a different posture than joy. Josephine Okafor watched from a hotel room in Maniwaki on a laptop Mireille's cousin had set up on a bed tray. She was having a better week than the previous one. Dr. Beaumont had adjusted the medication. She had eaten dinner. She watched her daughter stand on the podium, and she brought 2 fingers to her lips and kissed them, even though Mireille couldn't see her from where she was. Then, she closed the laptop and finished her crossword, and went to sleep before 9 the way she did on the good nights when sleep came on its own. The notebook from under Mireille's bed is in the Natation Canada offices in Ottawa now, framed in the hallway outside the high-performance team room. Annette Plouffe had asked for permission to put it there after the Pan Ams. Mireille had thought about it for a full week before she said yes. It is open to a page from the summer Mireille was 14. The handwriting is Josephine's. The entries run in roses. Date, distance, time, weather, 1 or 2 words of observation. Strong finish. Head high. Didn't rest at wall, pushed the last 10. The time's progress in a long column down the page. They keep getting smaller. At the bottom of the last entry on that page, in a different pen, as if added later, Josephine had written, "She doesn't know yet." If you have ever had someone hold a stopwatch over something you were doing, was watching, when no one else was watching, when the only competition was the number, when the only competition was the number, and the only witness was someone who loved you, tag that person tonight. Tell them you still carry the number. Tell them it mattered. Because there is a girl somewhere in a 1-bedroom apartment above a dépanneur with a photograph taped above her sink and a notebook under her bed and a drive to a pool at 5 in the morning that nobody has filed yet. And the only thing standing between her and that podium is whether one person decides to write the number down.